The birth of a nation, the United States of America. On the grand journey of human history, there is a tale of the birth and rise of a young but ambitious nation that grew to become a global superpower, the United States of America. From its earliest days, when 13 resilient colonies boldly declared independence from the yoke of the British Empire, they laid the foundation for a bold new ideal of freedom, democracy, and human rights. This is not merely a story of heroic battles or struggles for independence. It is an unrelenting journey of a people shaping their identity, overcoming formidable challenges, and building a radiant future. From the humble fields of the colonial era to the gleaming modern cities, from the values etched in the Declaration of Independence to profound social transformations, the history of America is a vibrant tapestry, reflecting an enduring aspiration to rise and an ever-expanding influence across the globe. The journey of Leif Erikson and the dream of crossing the seas. Around the year 1000, as the first light of dawn broke over the frigid shores of Greenland, a young man named Leif Erikson stood by the sea gazing westward. The salty wind tousled his golden hair, and within him burned a dream, to explore the mysterious lands whispered about in vague tales. Leif, son of Eric the Red, a renowned Norse explorer, had heard stories of a lush green land from a sailor named Bjarni Herjolfsson. Bjarni, lost in a storm during a voyage, had glimpsed strange shores where trees grew thick and the soil was fertile. Driven by curiosity, Leif resolved to find this place. He prepared a sturdy wooden ship, adorned with carved dragon heads, and with a crew of brave sailors, they raised their sails, letting the wind guide them across the vast ocean. The journey was far from easy. Towering waves, icy and relentless, seemed to test Leif's resolve. Yet each night, as the sky opened to reveal a million twinkling stars, he felt as though his ancestors were guiding him through the darkness. At last, after days adrift, they sighted a coastline where rolling green hills embraced serene bays. Leif named this place Vinland for the wild grapevines that flourished there. They built wooden huts, known today as Lonso Meadows, and weathered a season where snow blanketed the land, but their hearts were warmed by the thrill of discovery. Leif spoke of the native people they met, enigmatic figures with bronze skin and curious gazes. They exchanged gifts, sometimes furs, sometimes tiny kernels of corn. But Vinland, though beautiful, was not a place to stay forever. After a few years, the challenges of this distant land and the pull of home led Leif and his crew back to Greenland. Their huts faded into obscurity, like a dream lost in the morning mist. Yet Leif's story, like a quiet ember, continued to glow. It inspired future explorers who dreamed of a new world where everything could begin anew. Nearly 500 years later, another man from a far-off land would rekindle that dream. Christopher Columbus and the light of the New World. In 1492, at the bustling port of Palos, Spain, the sun cast a golden glow over ships ready to set sail. Christopher Columbus, a navigator from Genoa, stood on the deck of the Santa Maria, his eyes alight as he looked toward the horizon. He believed that by sailing west, he could find a shorter route to Asia, a land of gold, spices, and legendary treasures. Columbus was not the first to dream of new lands, but he was the one who brought that dream closer to reality. With the backing of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, he led 3 small ships, the Santa Maria, Pinta, and Nina, across the boundless blue ocean. The voyage stretched on for weeks, and at times his crew grew weary and fearful. But Columbus, his warm voice and unwavering faith,
urged them on. "Just one more day," he said, "and we'll see land." Then, on an October night under a silvery moonlight, a sailor cried out, "Land!" It was a small island in the West Indies, which Columbus named San Salvador, though its exact location remains a mystery today. Stepping ashore, he knelt, gave thanks to the heavens, thanked God, and planted a cross
in the white sand. The native people, with shy smiles, approached, bearing simple gifts like fruit or feathers. In his wonder, Columbus, thinking he had neared Asia, thought he was close to India, called them Indians. It was a mistake, but it opened a new chapter in history. They explored other islands like Cuba and Hispaniola and the Otaba, where they found tropical forests, shimmering rivers, and people living simply but with great hospitality. Stories of this new world, they spread across Europe like wings carrying glad tidings. The New World, they called it, a place brimming with promise, where every dream seemed possible come true. But not all was light. Columbus's voyage ships also brought diseases unknown to the native peoples. And as other explorers followed, they carried greed and conquest. But in this moment, as when Columbus first set foot on new soil, let's dwell only on the joy of discovery, on the feeling of a world unfolding before him. The race of empires and the colonial dream. In the years that followed, Europe awoke to tales of the New World. Kingdoms, like old friends gathered around a chessboard, began a silent race. Spain, England, France, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Portugal all sought a piece of this new land. They sent ships across the ocean, carrying explorers, and fluttering dreams. In Spain, adventurers like Juan Ponce de Leon and Hernando de Soto sailed south, charting the sunlit lands of Florida and the southeast. They traversed glistening swamps, dense forests, and pristine beaches, recording every detail for their homeland. In France, Jacques Cartier paddled along the St. Lawrence River, where cool waters flowed and green hills stretched endlessly. He dreamed of a passage to the Pacific, but instead found a land rich with furs and potential. Meanwhile, England dispatched John Cabot, or Giovanni Caboto, to the shores Leif had once touched. In 1497, Cabot reached Newfoundland, where fish were so plentiful they could be scooped up in baskets. He returned to England with tales of a bountiful land, igniting the imagination of his listeners. The Dutch, with their merchant's keen eye, began charting rivers and bays, envisioning thriving trade routes. And the Dutch traders, though few, sent small ships, seeking a quiet corner to call their own. As they arrived in the New World, they met native peoples living in ways vastly different from their own. Some tribes welcomed them with fruit or furs, but others watched with wary eyes. These encounters, like the opening notes of a symphony, were both beautiful and fragile. But this vast, mysterious land, this vast mystery, was more than a place to explore. It became a canvas for European powers to paint upon, each with their own colors. Spain dreamed of gold and empire. England envisioned green fields and peaceful villages. France sought trade routes and native allies. And deep within all of them, they all felt that this land would change the world forever. The first villages under the moonlight. Beneath the North American sky, where stars twinkled like tiny jewels, the vast land began to welcome new visitors. Following the sea voyages of Leif Erikson and Christopher Columbus, people from distant Europe started dreaming of a new life. They carried with them hopes, homesickness, and untold stories. This was the colonial era, when the first villages rose amidst deep forests, when encounters between people sparked both joy and sorrow. Now, from the horizon, great ships appeared once more, bearing Europeans with dreams of building a new home. Spain, England, France, the Netherlands, each nation sought to leave its mark on this land, like artists painting on a blank canvas. The Europeans called this place the New World, but for the native peoples it was home, the land where their ancestors had lived for generations. The first meetings between them were like a strange dance. Sometimes they exchanged gifts: a woolen coat from Europe for a deerskin, a bowl of fragrant corn for a gleaming iron knife. Sometimes they sat together under the moonlight, trying to understand each other through smiles and gestures. But peace was not always present. Misunderstandings arose, and at times arrows and muskets echoed in the darkness. Worse still, the ships from Europe brought diseases unknown to the native peoples. Strange fevers spread quickly, claiming countless lives, leaving villages empty and hearts heavy with grief. Yet amidst these challenges, the seeds of a new life began to sprout. The Europeans, though far from home, were determined to build houses, fields, and dreams. They came from many places, driven by different reasons. Some sought gold, others freedom, and some simply a fresh start. Roanoke, a dream vanished in the mist. In 1585, a small island off the coast of what we now call North Carolina. Here, the English made their first attempt at a colonial dream. They named the place Roanoke, a land of fine white sands, forests alive with birds, and waves gently lapping the shore. Led by Sir Walter Raleigh, a group of settlers set foot on the island, bringing tools, seeds, and hopes of building a new life. The early days in Roanoke were filled with joy. The settlers built wooden huts, planted corn and potatoes, and watched the sunrise over the sea. They met the Algonquian native people, who were friendly but cautious. On some evenings, they shared roasted fish by the shore, laughing and exchanging stories. A baby girl, Virginia Dare, was born, the first English child in the New World, a symbol of hope. But Roanoke was not a paradise. The soil was hard to farm, winters were harsh, and food grew scarce. Relations with the native people grew tense as small misunderstandings turned into conflicts.
The settlers sent a ship back to England for supplies, but when it returned in 1590, the village was gone. No trace, no explanation. The huts stood empty, with only a single word carved into a tree: Croatoan. Had they moved to live with the nearby Croatoan tribe? Or were they lost in the deep forests? No one knows for certain. Roanoke became the lost colony, a mystery forever shrouded in mist. Though it failed, Roanoke's story was not in vain. It was a first lesson, teaching the English that the New World was not easily tamed, that they needed patience, unity, and respect for those who had lived there long before. And so they tried again with a new village called Jamestown. Jamestown, a tiny flame in the wilderness. In 1607, a swampy land along the James River in what is now Virginia. A group of about 100 English settlers, sponsored by the Virginia Company, stepped ashore and named the place Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in North America. They built simple huts, felled trees for fences, and dreamed of prosperity. But in its early days, Jamestown was like a fragile flame, easily snuffed out. Summers in Jamestown were sweltering, mosquitoes buzzed everywhere, and the river water was unfit to drink. Many settlers, noblemen or craftsmen, were unused to farming or hunting. They searched for gold but found only dirt and sand. Food ran out, and hunger led to exhaustion and quarrels. The nearby Powhatan native people initially helped, bringing corn and venison, but mistrust grew between the two groups. Winter came, bitterly cold, and many did not survive. Then a man named John Smith stepped forward. With tousled hair and a commanding voice, he reorganized the village, teaching the settlers to work together. "He who does not work shall not eat," he declared, and slowly Jamestown began to change. They learned to grow corn from the Powhatan, hunt deer, and fish. John Smith also forged ties with the Powhatan chief and his daughter, Pocahontas. You may know her story, a young woman with a warm smile who helped bridge two worlds. Though her tale has been embellished, her presence brought precious moments of peace. Despite its hardships, Jamestown endured, becoming a small flame that burned steadily in the darkness. But it also carried a sorrow. In 1619, a Dutch ship arrived carrying enslaved Africans, the first of millions who would be brought to America, marking the start of a painful chapter in history. Plymouth, the breeze of freedom. In 1620, a rocky, windswept coast in what is now Massachusetts. A ship called the Mayflower, after weeks at sea, anchored at this shore. On board were the Puritans, or Pilgrims, people who left England seeking religious freedom. They wanted to worship as they chose, free from the constraints of church or king. As they stepped ashore, they knelt, giving thanks for their safe arrival. But before them lay a harsh land, with dense forests and a bitter winter approaching. Before leaving the ship, they signed the Mayflower Compact, a pledge to build a fair community where all had a voice. It was a beautiful moment, like a breeze of freedom sweeping through the new land. That first winter in Plymouth was brutal. Icy winds cut through, snow blanketed the ground, and half the Mayflower's passengers perished. But when spring arrived, a glimmer of hope emerged. A native man named Somerset walked into the village, saying, "Welcome," in English he'd learned from fishermen. He introduced them to Squanto, a Wampanoag man who taught them to plant corn, fish, and survive in this land. Squanto, with an open heart, became a cherished friend to Plymouth. Picture the laughter of settlers and Wampanoag during their first harvest feast, what we now call Thanksgiving. They ate, shared stories, and gave thanks for life's blessings. Plymouth, though small, became a symbol of resilience and faith in a brighter future. Other colors of the New World. While the English built Jamestown and Plymouth, other powers left their marks. Travel south to 1565, where the Spanish founded St. Augustine.
In what is now Florida, this was the first lasting European settlement in North America, with cobblestone streets, small churches, oranges and olives. St. Augustine felt like a slice of Spain, where sunlight filtered through trees and church bells rang each morning. Drift north to the St. Lawrence River, where the French established Quebec and Montreal. The French, with their love for furs and trade, built wooden forts and befriended tribes like the Huron. They paddled canoes along endless rivers, singing lively songs, and dreamed of a vast empire. By 1718, they reached New Orleans, where streets bloomed with jasmine and music began to fill the air. And don't forget the Dutch, shrewd merchants who founded New Amsterdam in 1614 on an island that would become New York. New Amsterdam was vibrant with red brick houses, spinning windmills, and ships laden with goods. The Dutch welcomed people from all corners of the world, making New Amsterdam a mosaic of colors.
The winds of change over North America. Beneath the North American sky, where stars glimmer like tiny candles, the vast land whispers its story. The first villages, Jamstone, Plymouth, St. Augustine, New Amsterdam, have risen like small flames in the wilderness. Europeans, with dreams of forging a new life, have set foot on this land, alongside the native peoples who have called it home for thousands of years. But as these villages grow, as fields expand, winds of change sweep through, carrying both peace and conflict. This is the land of the native peoples, Wampanoag, Powhatan, Huron, and countless other tribes who live in harmony with nature, hunting deer, planting corn, and sharing stories by firelight. But now, European settlers, with their wooden houses, wheat fields, and new roads, are reshaping the landscape. Land, once boundless and free, becomes a source of contention. The native peoples seek to protect the forests and rivers of their ancestors, while settlers dream of farms and towns of their own. Differences in culture and worldview make their encounters feel like a song struggling to find its melody. In the early years, there are moments of beauty. Native peoples and settlers exchange corn and furs, feasting together during harvest celebrations. But as more settlers arrive, as they build fences and fell trees, tensions grow. Small misunderstandings, a fish taken from a net, a plot of land plowed, can spark conflict. And so, small skirmishes begin, like gathering storms before the sky truly roars. Let me tell you of those days, of the conflicts that shaped this land, and of the people who sought peace amidst the edge of war. The first sparks of conflict. In the 17th century, as European colonies spread like tender branches, new villages sprout in New England, where the Puritans built Plymouth. Small churches and sprawling cornfields dot the landscape. The settlers, believing the land is a gift from God, expand their territories, often unaware that the forests they clear or the rivers they fish belong to native peoples who have lived there for generations. The native tribes, like the Wampanoag or Narragansett, live differently. For them, land is not to be owned but shared, like air or sunlight. They hunt, plant, and move with the seasons, allowing the earth to rest. But when settlers erect fences and claim plots as their own, the native peoples feel a piece of their world slipping away. Disputes arise, sometimes mere words, heated exchanges, but sometimes arrows and muskets speak in the darkness. These small conflicts erupt across the colonies. In Virginia, the Powhatan and Jamestown settlers once shared peaceful years thanks to Pocahontas and John Smith. But as settlers demand more land, building forts and bringing more guns, they encroach further. The Powhatan chief Opechecanoka chooses to resist. In 1622, a sudden attack claims hundreds of settler lives. The English retaliate, and in the years that follow, blood stains both sides. Yet, even amidst the fighting, there are those who strive to bridge the divide. Native peoples learning English, settlers learning to grow corn, and children playing together by the riverbanks. King Philip's War, a fire ignites. In 1675, in New England, a great storm brews. The Wampanoag, who once helped the Puritans of Plymouth survive their first winter, now face a harsh reality. English colonies have sprawled, claiming their forests and meadows. Old peace treaties lie broken, and the Wampanoag feel their home slipping away. Their leader, Metacom, known to the English as King Philip, is a man with deep eyes and a heavy heart. He grew up in peaceful times, visiting English villages, wearing wool coats and sipping tea. But as his tribe's lands are taken, as the Wampanoag are confined to shrinking spaces, Metacom resolves to stand firm. He forges alliances with other tribes, like the Narragansett, and a war begins, what history calls King Philip's War. Metacom, his voice warm and resolute, speaks to his warriors of the old days when their ancestors hunted freely across vast plains. He does not want war, but he knows that without a fight, his people may vanish.
And so, in the summer of 1675, arrows fly through forests, villages burn, and gunfire echoes in the night. King Philip's War becomes one of the bloodiest conflicts in New England's history. English villages, from Swansea to Springfield, are attacked, leaving hundreds of settlers dead. The English, with their muskets and forts, strike back, raiding native villages. In the winter of 1675, they burn a Narragansett stronghold, killing hundreds, including women and children. Metacom and his warriors fight bravely, but they cannot match the English in numbers or weaponry. By 1676, after more than a year of fighting, Metacom is hunted into a swamp in Rhode Island. A single shot rings out, and he falls, ending the war. The Wampanoag, along with their allies, are devastated. Many are killed, enslaved, or forced to flee their homelands. New England, though still home to the settlers, bears deep scars. Yet, in the darkness, small stories of kindness endure. A settler sheltering a native child, a Wampanoag warrior guiding an English family to safety. The race of empires, England and France. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, North America is no longer just the land of native peoples and settlers, it is a chessboard for European empires. England and France, two great powers, see this land as a treasure. The English built colonies along the eastern coast, from Massachusetts to Virginia, with bustling villages and wheat fields. The French, with wooden forts along the St. Lawrence and Mississippi rivers, dream of a fur-trading empire stretching from Quebec to New Orleans. But between England and France lies a vast region, the Ohio River Valley, with its deep forests, long rivers, and plains teeming with game. Both powers covet this land, and to claim it, they seek allies among the native tribes. The Huron and Algonquin often side with the French, who settle less and focus on trade. The Iroquois, with the strength of their five-nation confederation, lean toward the English, hoping to protect their lands from colonial expansion.
But peace does not last. A series of wars, King William's War, 1689 to 1697, Queen Anne's War, 1702 to 1713, and King George's War, 1744 to 1748, erupt between England and France, drawing in both native peoples and settlers. These wars differ from Europe's grand battles with thousands of soldiers and cannons. In North America, they are sudden raids, forest ambushes, where native warriors move like shadows. A village might be peaceful at dawn, but by night, smoke rises from burning huts. Settlers build forts, native peoples set traps, and both sides suffer losses. During King William's War, the French and their Huron allies attack English villages in New York and New England, while the English and Iroquois retaliate with raids on Quebec. Queen Anne's War brings fiercer battles, with the English seizing Acadia, now Nova Scotia, from France. By King George's War, the English gain further ground, but both sides grow weary. The native peoples, whether allied with England or France, often bear the heaviest toll, as their lands are encroached upon and their tribes divided. A journey toward peace amidst the divide. As the wars between England and France subside, North America remains a land of dreams and challenges. The settlers, though weary from conflict, continue to sow seeds for new harvests. These conflicts, though tragic, are part of North America's story. They are like storms sweeping through the land. But after the storm, the sun rises and life goes on. The settlers, their villages growing, begin to dream of a future where they can shape their own destiny. Yet the struggles, from small clashes between native peoples and settlers to grand wars between empires, leave lasting marks. Soon, a greater conflict, the French and Indian War, will transform North America forever.
Paths through the deep forest. Beneath the North American sky, where stars flicker like tiny candles,
the vast land tells a story of upheaval and courage. This is the tale of the French and Indian War, a chapter filled with turmoil but also shimmering with moments of bravery, hope, and dreams of peace. This is the land of native peoples, Shawnee, Delaware, Iroquois, who live in harmony with nature, hunting and sharing stories under the moonlight. But now, both the English and the French gaze upon this land with longing. For the English, the Ohio Valley is a frontier for expanding their colonies, a place for new farms and towns. For the French, it is a vital link between their forts in Quebec and New Orleans, the lifeblood of their fur-trading empire. Both sides seek control, and in their race, they draw the native peoples into a chessboard of war. The French and Indian War, beginning in 1754, is not just a North American story. It is part of the 7 Years' War, a global conflict between European empires, stretching from the fields of Germany to the seas of India. But here, in the forests and valleys of the New World, the war takes on a distinct hue. Battles in deep woods, fragile alliances, and people searching for light amidst darkness. A spark in the Ohio Valley. In 1754, picture a wild land where the Ohio River winds through lush green hills. This is where the English and French collide, like waves meeting on the ocean. The French build wooden forts, like Fort Duquesne, to guard their trade routes. The English, with crowded colonies in Virginia and Pennsylvania, aim to expand westward, claiming the Ohio Valley as their own. The native peoples, such as the Iroquois Confederacy or the Delaware tribe, stand at a crossroads, striving to protect their lands and way of life. Into this story steps a young man named George Washington. Just 22 years old, with neatly tied hair and eyes full of resolve, Washington is a militia officer from Virginia. Tasked with leading a small group of soldiers to the Ohio Valley, he is to safeguard English interests and demand the French withdraw. But Washington's journey is far from smooth. In May 1754, he and his men encounter a French patrol near Fort Duquesne. In a tense moment, shots ring out, and a French officer, Joseph Coulon de Jumonville, is killed. This brief skirmish, lasting mere minutes, is a spark that ignites the flames of war. The French, outraged, call it an assassination. The English, led by Washington, retreat to a makeshift wooden stronghold called Fort Necessity. Fort Necessity is a modest fort, hastily built in an open field. Rain pours, turning the ground to mud, and Washington and his men struggle to hold fast. In July 1754, the French and their native allies attack. Muskets fire, arrows fly, and after a day of fighting, Washington is forced to surrender. He signs a French document, unfamiliar with its language, unwittingly admitting responsibility for Jumonville's death.
Though allowed to retreat, the defeat at Fort Necessity is a harsh lesson for Washington, yet it marks the first step toward his greater destiny. The fire spreads. As war erupts, North America becomes a land of battles and alliances. The French, with sturdy forts and native allies like the Huron, Algonquin, and Shawnee, hold the early advantage. Familiar with the rugged terrain, they move like shadows, striking swiftly and retreating. The English, with larger armies and wealthy colonies, bring disciplined red-coated regulars, but they are often slow and unaccustomed to forest warfare. By 1755, tensions escalate. General Edward Braddock, a seasoned English officer, leads 2,000 troops to attack Fort Duquesne. George Washington, now a volunteer aide, joins him. Braddock, confident in European tactics, marches his men in neat rows as if on an English plain. But in the deep forest, the French and their native allies lie in wait. On July 9, 1755, an ambush unfolds. Gunfire erupts, arrows dart from the trees, and the English ranks dissolve into chaos. Braddock is fatally wounded, and Washington, though inexperienced in command, leads the survivors to safety. The defeat at the Monongahela shocks the English, revealing the strength of the French and their native allies. For Washington, the loss teaches him that war in the New World demands flexibility and cunning. In the years that follow, the French dominate. They capture English forts from Oswego to William Henry, pushing the English eastward. Native tribes, especially those protecting their lands from English expansion, fight alongside the French with fierce resolve. But war is more than gunfire. In native villages, elders gather, debating whether to continue their alliance with the French or seek peace. In English colonies, farmers and craftsmen worry, building stockades and praying for calm. The light of victory. By 1758, the winds of war shift. The English, under Prime Minister William Pitt, commit fully to North America. They send more troops, build warships, and court native tribes. The Iroquois Confederacy, with the strength of its 5 nations, begins to align with the English, hoping to safeguard their interests. The English also adapt, learning to fight in forests with scouts and nimble tactics. In 1759, the city of Quebec, a formidable fortress perched on cliffs above the St. Lawrence River. This is the heart of New France, where stone walls and cozy homes stand strong. General James Wolfe, a young but determined English officer, leads an army to besiege Quebec. The French, commanded by General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm, prepare to defend the city to the last. The decisive battle unfolds on September 13, 1759, on a field called the Plains of Abraham, just outside Quebec's walls. At dawn, English troops secretly scale the cliffs, surprising the French. Muskets roar, smoke clouds the air, and within
hours, the English prevail. Both Wolfe and Montcalm fall, their lives claimed by the battle, but Quebec is taken. The victory at Quebec is a turning point, paving the way for New France's collapse. In 1760, the English capture Montreal, and the French in North America surrender. The war lingers elsewhere for a few years, but in 1763, the Treaty of Paris is signed, ending the 7 Years' War. Under the treaty, France cedes Canada and Louisiana east of the Mississippi to England, retaining only a few small islands. Spain, France's ally, cedes Florida to England but receives Louisiana west of the Mississippi in compensation. The English, now the dominant power in North America, celebrate their triumph, but new challenges loom: how to govern a vast territory, reconcile with native peoples, and pay the war's debts. George Washington's journey and the dream of peace. Amid the years of war, George Washington grows from a clumsy youth into a seasoned leader. After the defeat at Fort Necessity, he joins other campaigns, learning to command in the wilderness and earning his soldiers' trust. Though the war brings victory to the English, it leaves scars. Native villages destroyed, settler families bereaved, and treaties broken. The native peoples, caught between empires, face a reshaped world, while settlers, weary but hopeful, plant seeds for new harvests. When the Treaty of Paris is signed, North America enters a new era. The English now control most lands east of the Mississippi, but they face unrest from native peoples and settlers alike. The Royal Proclamation of 1763, issued to appease native tribes, forbid settlers from crossing the Appalachian Mountains, stirring whispers of discontent in the colonies. The winds of freedom over the colonies. The French and Indian War has ended, leaving quiet forests and increasingly vibrant colonial villages. From Boston to Philadelphia, from Virginia to New York, the people of the colonies are building their lives, cozy wooden homes, golden cornfields, and dreams of a bright future. But amidst these peaceful days, a new wind is blowing, a wind of discontent, a yearning for freedom, and ideas that will transform this land forever. In 1763, the colonists have just endured years of grueling war. They fought alongside the British, defending their homes against the French and their native allies. Now, with peace restored, they hope to expand westward to the lush valleys beyond the Appalachian Mountains. But from distant London, King George III and Parliament have other plans. They issue the Royal Proclamation of 1763, forbidding colonists from settling west of the Appalachians to avoid conflict with native tribes. Though well-intentioned, this decision sweeps through the colonies like a cold wind, weighing heavy on many hearts. The Royal Proclamation and whispers of discontent. In 1763, a small village in Pennsylvania, where farmers gather around a rough wooden table in a local tavern. Flickering candlelight illuminates their faces as they hear news of the Royal Proclamation. They had dreamed of the western lands, with fertile soil and forests teeming with game. Many fought in the French and Indian War, shedding sweat and blood to wrest those lands from the French. But now, King George III decrees they cannot cross the Appalachians, all to keep peace with tribes like the Shawnee and Cherokee. The Royal Proclamation is just the beginning. In London, Parliament faces a pressing issue: war debt. The French and Indian War has emptied the treasury, and funds are needed to pay debts and maintain troops to protect the colonies. They decide that the colonists who benefited from the victory should help bear the cost. Thus, a series of new laws are passed, like small waves building toward a great storm. The laws and the cry of no taxation without representation. In 1764, a bustling harbor in Boston, where ships laden with goods dock. Colonists, from merchants to fishermen, go about their daily tasks. But then, word of the Sugar Act arrives.
This law taxes sugar, molasses, wine, the other imported goods to raise revenue for Britain. The colonists do not object to taxes. They have paid them before, but they want a voice in deciding those taxes. No taxation without representation, they declare, a slogan echoing from taverns to meeting halls. In 1765, a new law, the Stamp Act, fans the flames of discontent higher. It requires all legal documents, newspapers, and even playing cards and dice to bear a tax stamp. For the first time, a tax is imposed directly on the colonists, not just on imported goods. From Boston to Charleston, anger surges. The colonists are not merely upset about the tax's cost, but feel treated as second-class subjects. Finally, under pressure from the colonies and British merchants affected by boycotts, Parliament repeals the Stamp Act in 1766. The colonists celebrate with fireworks and toasts. But the joy is short-lived. Parliament soon passes the Declaratory Act, asserting its right to make any law for the colonies. Then, in 1767, the Townshend Acts impose taxes on tea, glass, paper, and other goods. Once again, the colonists feel betrayed. The Boston Massacre and lasting scars.
In 1770, the cobblestone streets of Boston, where tension crackles in the air. To enforce the tax laws, Britain has sent troops to the colonies, and in Boston, red-coated soldiers become a familiar and unwelcome sight. Locals, from shipwrights to students, feel insulted by the soldiers patrolling their streets. Small quarrels erupt, sometimes just a taunt or a snowball hurled at a soldier. On a frigid night, March 5, 1770, a crowd gathers outside the Custom House in Boston. They throw stones, snowballs, and insults at a group of British soldiers. In the chaos, a panicked soldier fires his musket, and more shots follow. When the smoke clears, 5 colonists lie dead in the snow, including Crispus Attucks, a man of African and native descent who becomes a symbol of sacrifice. The event, dubbed the Boston Massacre, shakes the colonies. Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty call it proof of British brutality, while the British claim their soldiers acted in self-defense. Paul Revere, a skilled silversmith, creates an engraving of the incident, spreading it across the colonies and stoking outrage.
The Boston Tea Party, a night under the moonlight. In 1773, Boston Harbor, where ships glide on water shimmering with moonlight. The Tea Act, passed that year, allows Britain's East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies at a low price, but it retains a tax. The colonists do not object to the tea's cost, but to Parliament's continued taxation without their consent. No taxation without representation, the cry resounds, louder than ever. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of Sons of Liberty, disguised as Mohawk natives, quietly board 3 tea ships in Boston Harbor. Under the moonlight, they work swiftly, prying open chests and dumping hundreds of pounds of tea into the water. No shots are fired, no blood is spilled, but this act, known as the Boston Tea Party, is a bold declaration that the colonists will not submit. These men are not vandals, but fathers and brothers, convinced they are defending their rights. As the sun rises, Boston Harbor glitters with floating tea leaves, and news of the Tea Party spreads across the colonies, inspiring others to stand up. The Intolerable Acts and the Continental Congress. Parliament, furious over the Boston Tea Party, retaliates with the Intolerable Acts in 1774. These laws close Boston Harbor, curb Massachusetts self-government, allow British troops to quarter in colonists' homes, and expand royal governors' powers. The colonists call them intolerable because they feel like chains binding their freedom. The colonies begin to unite more closely through committees of correspondence, groups exchanging letters, sharing news, and planning. From New Hampshire to South Carolina, they sense their fates are intertwined. In 1774, the colonies send delegates to Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. In a modest hall, figures like Samuel Adams, John Adams, and George Washington gather to discuss how to confront Britain. They do not call for war, but demand that King George III repeal the Intolerable Acts and respect their rights. They also urge a boycott of British goods and prepare militias in case peace does not come. Lexington and Concord, the shot heard round the world. On April 19, 1775, in a small village called Lexington, the first light of dawn breaks over grassy fields. The colonial militia, known as Minutemen, have been training for months, drilling with muskets and bayonets, ready to defend their homes. Word spreads that British troops, in their bright red coats, are marching from Boston to seize weapons stored in Concord and arrest revolutionary leaders like Samuel Adams and John Hancock. About 70 militiamen, farmers, blacksmiths, and neighbors line up facing hundreds of well-trained British soldiers. Captain John Parker, their commander, tells his men, "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have war, let it begin here. No one knows who fires the first shot, but in that moment, muskets roar, smoke clouds the air, and 8 militiamen fall. The skirmish at Lexington lasts mere minutes, but it is a spark that ignites the flame of revolution. The British press on to Concord, but there they meet fiercer resistance. Militia from nearby villages swarm in, hiding behind stone walls and trees. They fire from cover, move swiftly, and force the British back to Boston. The battles of Lexington and Concord, though small, mark the opening of the American Revolution. News of Lexington and Concord spreads like wildfire across the colonies. From New Hampshire to South Carolina, people take up arms, join militias, and exchange letters vowing to defend their rights. The shot heard round the world, as Ralph Waldo Emerson later calls it, not only signals the start of the American Revolution, but also inspires dreamers of freedom worldwide. The Continental Congress and the Continental Army. In Philadelphia, delegates from 12 colonies gather in May 1775 for the Second Continental Congress. In a modest hall, figures like John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson sit together, debating the future. They no longer merely seek justice from King George III, they begin to envision a new path, one of independence. The Congress resolves to form the Continental Army, a unified force to confront the British. They choose George Washington, a former Virginia officer with a thoughtful gaze and steady voice, as commander-in-chief. Washington rides from Philadelphia, bearing the weight of leading an untrained army short on weapons and supplies. He is not yet a great general, but his patience, determination, and belief in freedom make him the right man for the task.
The Continental Army, made up of farmers, craftsmen, and young men, gathers around Boston, where the British are besieged after Lexington and Concord. One early battle, the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775, showcases their courage. Though the Americans lose, they inflict heavy casualties on the British, proving they will not be easily subdued. The Declaration of Independence, a promise of freedom. In 1776, in Philadelphia, summer sunlight streams through the windows of the State House. The Continental Congress debates a bold idea, declaring independence from Britain. Thomas Jefferson, a young Virginia lawyer with a sharp pen, is tasked with drafting the document. In a small room, by candlelight, he writes words that will change history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. On July 4, 1776, the delegates vote to adopt the Declaration of Independence. Applause fills the hall, and the Liberty Bell rings out in Philadelphia, proclaiming that the 13 colonies are now independent states, united in a dream of freedom. The Declaration is not just a message to Britain, but a promise to the world that a nation can be built on the foundation of human rights. News of the Declaration spreads across the states, from Boston taverns to Virginia farms. People gather, read the document aloud, and light fireworks. But they know independence will not come easily. The British, with their mighty army and the world's largest navy, will not let them go without a fight. And so, the war presses on, with challenges and triumphs ahead. Trenton and Princeton, candles in the darkness. By late 1776, the Continental Army faces dark days. After defeats in New York, Washington and his men are driven through New Jersey, their spirits low. Many soldiers, hungry and ragged, believe the war is lost. But Washington, with a steadfast heart, believes a small victory could rekindle hope. On Christmas night, 1776, under a snowy sky, Washington leads 2,400 men across the icy Delaware River in small boats. They march to Trenton, where a garrison of Hessian mercenaries serving the British rests. At dawn on December 26, Washington strikes, capturing Trenton with minimal losses. A week later, he wins another victory at Princeton, defeating a British force. These small victories, like candles in the darkness, restore faith in the Continental Army and inspire more to join the Revolution. Trenton and Princeton remind the colonists that, despite hardship, freedom is worth fighting for. Saratoga, the turning point of the Revolution. In 1777, countryside near Saratoga, New York. The British, led by General John Burgoyne, planned to split New England from the other states by seizing the Hudson River Valley. But the Continental Army, commanded by General Horatio Gates and bolstered by local militia, stands ready. In two major battles in September and October 1777, the Americans fight fiercely, taking cover behind trees and stone walls. Benedict Arnold, a bold officer, before his later betrayal, leads a decisive charge, inflicting heavy losses on the British. On October 17, Burgoyne surrenders, marking the greatest American victory thus far. This triumph not only boosts morale, but convinces France, a major power, to ally with America. In 1778, France sends troops, ships, and funds, turning the war into a global conflict. Spain and the Netherlands later join, weakening Britain. Saratoga is a turning point, like a fresh wind filling the sails of the Revolution.
Yorktown, the dawn of victory. In 1781, a small town called Yorktown, Virginia, where the York River flows into Chesapeake Bay. After years of fighting, the Continental Army, now aided by French troops under General Rochambeau, has grown stronger. Washington, coordinating with the Marquis de Lafayette and the French Navy, plans to trap the British Army led by General Charles Cornwallis. From September 28, 1781, the American-French alliance bombards the British, while the French Navy blocks their escape by sea. After 3 weeks of fighting, Cornwallis surrenders on October 19. As the British march out, they play "The World Turned Upside Down," as if the world has indeed been upended. A small colonial army has defeated the mightiest empire. Yorktown does not end the war immediately, but it saps Parliament's will to continue. Peace negotiations begin, and the dream of independence draws closer. The Treaty of Paris, a nation is born. In 1783, in Paris, American diplomats Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay signed the Treaty of Paris with Britain. The treaty recognizes the United States as an independent nation, with borders stretching from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River, from Canada to Florida. The colonists, now American citizens, celebrate across the states, lighting fireworks and ringing bells. The Treaty of Paris is more than a document. It is a promise that a nation built on freedom and equality will rise from this land. But the Americans know challenges lie ahead. How to unite 13 states, how to fulfill the Declaration's promise for all. The early years of independence, an imperfect nation. In 1783, a small village in Massachusetts where farmers gather in a cozy tavern. Flickering candlelight illuminates their faces, flushed with joy from celebrating America's victory in the Revolutionary War. The Treaty of Paris has recognized the United States as an independent nation, with borders stretching from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. But as the fireworks fade, they realize that freedom does not guarantee stability. The states, from New Hampshire to Georgia, act like small nations, each with its own laws, currency, and occasional quarrels, like bickering neighbors.
The Articles of Confederation, adopted during the war, grant too little power to the central government. Congress cannot tax, maintain a strong army, or settle disputes between states. War debts pile high, and the economy sways like a ship in a storm. One of the greatest challenges is the people's discontent. In Massachusetts, in 1786, a group of farmers led by Daniel Shays rises up in what becomes known as Shays' Rebellion. Furious over high taxes, crushing debt, and the state government's lack of support, they arm themselves with muskets and pitchforks, attacking courthouses to halt land foreclosures. The rebellion is eventually crushed, but it rings like a warning bell. The United States needs a stronger government to ensure peace and justice. Leaders like George Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton call for a convention to revise the Articles of Confederation. They envision a new constitution, a solid foundation for the nation. And so, in the spring of 1787, delegates from 12 states, Rhode Island declines to attend, gather in Philadelphia, where the Declaration of Independence was born, to chart the future of the United States. The U.S. Constitution, a beacon of freedom. In Philadelphia, the summer of 1787 is sweltering, and heated debates fill the State House. The delegates, known as the Founding Fathers, hail from across the states, from the seasoned Benjamin Franklin with his wry smile, to the youthful James Madison, dubbed the Father of the Constitution for his meticulous preparation. They convened to craft a constitution, a document to shape the government and safeguard the people's freedom. The Constitutional Convention is no easy task. Large states like Virginia want power based on population, while small states like New Jersey demand equal representation. After weeks of debate, they reach the Great Compromise, creating a bicameral Congress, the House of Representatives based on population, and the Senate with 2 seats per state. It is a wise step, like a bridge connecting large and small states. Another issue is the balance of power. The delegates want a strong government, but not one so powerful it becomes tyrannical. They designed a system with 3 branches: the legislative, Congress, to make laws; the executive, President, to enforce laws; and the judicial, courts, to interpret laws. Each branch checks and balances the others, like intertwined branches holding a tree upright. But not all issues are resolved. Slavery is a deep wound. Southern states want to count enslaved people in their population to gain more House seats without granting them citizenship. The 3/5 compromise emerges, counting each enslaved person as 3/5 of a person for representation purposes. It is a painful compromise, casting a shadow over the Constitution. By September 1787, the Constitution is complete. It is not perfect, but like a beacon, it guides the young nation. The delegates sign it, and the document is sent to the states for ratification. Fierce debates follow, with supporters, Federalists like Madison and Hamilton, penning the Federalist Papers to persuade, and opponents, Anti-Federalists, fearing a too powerful central government. By 1788, 9 states ratify, and the Constitution becomes the law of the land. The Bill of Rights, a promise of liberty. In 1789, the United States begins operating under its new Constitution. George Washington is elected the first president, stepping into the role with a heavy heart but resolute spirit. In New York, the temporary capital, the new Congress meets to lay the nation's foundation. But many worry that the Constitution, though robust, does not sufficiently protect individual rights, freedom of speech, religion, and fair trials. James Madison, now a congressman, listens to these concerns. He proposes a series of amendments known as the Bill of Rights to ensure the government never tramples on personal freedoms.
After much debate, Congress approves the first 10 amendments in 1791, collectively called the Bill of Rights. These rights, like seeds sown in fertile soil, will grow across generations, becoming the heart of American identity. But even as the Bill of Rights is passed, the nation faces challenges: how to stay united, how to expand, and how to live peacefully with native peoples.
Westward expansion, new paths. In the late 18th century, Americans begin looking west, where vast forests and sprawling prairies stretch to the Mississippi River. The Constitution and Bill of Rights bring stability, but dreams of land and opportunity drive thousands of pioneers beyond the Appalachians. They are farmers, hunters, and young dreamers, hauling wagons, axes, and hopes for a better life. New territories like Kentucky and Tennessee become states in the 1790s, drawing countless settlers. They build log cabins, plant corn, and form communities, transforming wilderness into bustling towns. But these lands are not empty. They are home to native tribes like the Shawnee, Cherokee, and Miami, who have lived there for millennia. Westward expansion brings tension. Native peoples, fearing the loss of their lands and way of life, often resist. Small conflicts erupt, such as the Northwest Indian War, 1790 to 1795, when tribes led by Chief Little Turtle fight U.S. forces in the Northwest Territory, now Ohio. After years of fighting, the Treaty of Greenville in 1795 cedes parts of the Northwest to the U.S., but leaves scars on both sides. Despite conflict, moments of peace emerge. In some places, settlers and native peoples trade corn and furs, learning from one another. Challenges and dreams of a young nation. By 1800, the United States steps into a new century. George Washington, who guided the nation through its infancy, dies in 1799, leaving a legacy of unity. John Adams, the second president, and Thomas Jefferson, the third, lead the country through new challenges, from political disputes between parties to tensions with Europe. But through it all, Americans continue to dream of a just nation, of new lands, and of a future where everyone has a place. The Constitution and Bill of Rights, like beacons, light the way. Westward expansion, though fraught with challenges, offers hope for new opportunities. And despite tensions with native peoples, seeds of understanding are sown.
The Louisiana Purchase, a new land. In 1803, Washington, D.C., where President Thomas Jefferson reads a letter from Harris. With his hair neatly tied and eyes deep in thought, Jefferson is a dreamer, believing the United States can become a vast nation where free farmers live in harmony with the land. The letter brings astonishing news. Napoleon Bonaparte, France's leader, is willing to sell the entire Louisiana Territory, a region stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, for $15 million. The Louisiana Territory, spanning over 800,000 square miles, nearly doubles the size of the United States overnight. Jefferson, though concerned about the purchase's constitutionality, sees it as a chance to expand his Empire of Liberty. Congress approves the deal, and on December 20, 1803, the American flag is raised in New Orleans, marking the dawn of a new era. But this land is not empty. It is home to dozens of native tribes, from the Sioux in the north to the Choctaw in the south, and French and Spanish settlers. To explore the new territory, Jefferson sends Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to lead an expedition, known as the Lewis and Clark Expedition. From 1804 to 1806, they traverse prairies, mountains, and rivers, aided by Sacagawea, a wise and courageous Shoshone woman. The journey not only maps the new land, but also inspires thousands of pioneers to venture west.
The Louisiana Purchase opens opportunities but raises questions. How to govern such a vast territory? How to live peacefully with native peoples? And how will the issue of slavery be addressed in these new lands? These questions, like seeds sown in the soil, will sprout both hope and conflict. The War of 1812, a flame of national identity. In 1812, the United States again faces Britain. Though independent, America feels threatened by the British, who disrupt American trade and impress American sailors into their navy. Meanwhile, many Americans, especially in the West, believe Britain is encouraging native tribes to resist U.S. expansion. With cries of free trade and sailors' rights and swelling national pride, Congress under President James Madison declares war on Britain in June 1812. The War of 1812 is a grueling conflict. British forces capture Washington, D.C., burning the White House and Capitol. But Americans also claim resounding victories. On Lake Erie, Captain Oliver Hazard Perry leads the U.S. Navy to defeat a British fleet, declaring, "We have met the enemy and they are ours."
In New Orleans, General Andrew Jackson, with wild hair and piercing eyes, leads a diverse army, from militia to free black soldiers, to a stunning victory in 1815, unaware that peace had already been signed. The Treaty of Ghent, signed in December 1814, ends the war with little territorial change. But the War of 1812 achieves something greater. It forges a stronger American identity. People begin to see themselves not just as Virginians or New Yorkers, but as Americans. Westward expansion and the Trail of Tears. In the 1820s and 1830s, the United States enters an era of rapid expansion. The Industrial Revolution brings steam engines, railroads, and factories, transforming cities like New York and Philadelphia into vibrant hubs. Meanwhile, pioneers push west, crossing the Appalachians to settle in new lands like Ohio, Indiana, and beyond. They carry dreams of fertile soil and free lives, but their journey often collides with native peoples who have called these lands home for millennia. Under pressure from settlers and the government, native tribes are forced from their lands. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson, who believes America's expansion is its destiny, signs the Indian Removal Act. This law compels southeastern tribes, Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole, to leave their homelands for territory west of the Mississippi, now Oklahoma. The journey, known as the Trail of Tears, is a heartbreaking chapter. From 1831 to 1839, tens of thousands of native people are forced to march thousands of miles through rain, snow, and cold. Thousands die from hunger, disease, and exhaustion. The Trail of Tears leaves a scar on history, a reminder that one dream's pursuit often comes at another's pain. Yet there are moments of light. Some Native Americans, like Sequoyah of the Cherokee, create a written language for their people, preserving their culture through hardship. Some settlers, moved by the natives' plight, speak out against the removals. The issue of slavery, seeds of division. By the 1820s, the issue of slavery begins to divide the United States like a growing crack in the earth. In the North, where industrialization flourishes, many oppose slavery, viewing it as a moral sin. In the South, where the economy relies on cotton and plantations, slavery is seen as the bedrock of prosperity. Millions of enslaved black people, bound in chains, toil under scorching suns, dreaming of freedom. In 1820, a fierce debate erupts when Missouri seeks statehood. Northern states want Missouri to be free, while Southern states want it to allow slavery. After months of argument, the Missouri Compromise is passed, admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, maintaining a balance. It also draws a line at the 36° 30' parallel, banning slavery in territories north of it. The compromise briefly preserves peace, but like a patch on a torn garment, it cannot hide the widening rift. By 1850, tensions flare again. The Fugitive Slave Act, part of the Compromise of 1850, requires Northerners to help capture escaped enslaved people and return them to their owners. This outrages many in the North, who see it as an affront to freedom. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, a former enslaved man with an inspiring voice, call for slavery's end. In 1857, the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision worsens the divide. Dred Scott, an enslaved man, sues for his freedom, but the court rules that black people are not citizens and cannot sue. It further declares that Congress cannot ban slavery in the territories, nullifying the Missouri Compromise. The decision, like a cold wind, drives the North and South further apart toward an inevitable conflict. A divided nation, an enduring dream. By 1860, the United States stands on the brink of division. From the Louisiana Purchase to the War of 1812, from the Trail of Tears to the Dred Scott decision, the nation has grown but carries deep scars. Pioneers continue westward, building towns and railroads. Abolitionists persist, writing books and holding meetings. And enslaved people, like stars in the night, keep dreaming of a day when they will be free. Abraham Lincoln, a lawyer with a warm voice, speaks of a house divided. He believes the United States cannot endure half free and half slave. His words, like a fresh breeze, carry hope that the nation can heal, but also warn of a storm approaching. Winds of peace through the storm. Through years of expansion and division, the United States has grown from dreams of freedom, but carries deep scars. The issue of slavery, discord between North and South, and questions of justice. Now, in 1861, the nation faces its greatest storm, the American Civil War, a conflict that will test a people's spirit and shape its future. From 1861 to 1865, the United States is torn by war, yet mended by resilience. It is the story of Abraham Lincoln, soldiers on both sides, and enslaved people dreaming of liberty. Secession, a house divided. In 1860, picture a small town in Illinois where Abraham Lincoln, a lanky lawyer with a warm voice, has just been elected the 16th President of the United States. With a weathered face and thoughtful eyes, Lincoln believes slavery is morally wrong, but pledges not to interfere with it in existing slave states. However, his victory, representing the anti-slavery Republican Party, strikes like lightning in the South. Southern states, reliant on slavery for their plantation economy, fear Lincoln will dismantle their way of life. In December 1860, South Carolina declares secession, proclaiming it is no longer part of the United States. Within months, 6 more southern states, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, follow, forming the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as president. After the war begins, 4 more states, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, join the Confederacy. Lincoln calls this secession a house divided, and he resolves to preserve the Union, not by abolishing slavery immediately, but by upholding the idea that a nation cannot survive if fractured. But peace slips away. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fire on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, marking the start of the American Civil War. The Great Battles, Fields of Sacrifice. In 1862, Maryland, where Antietam Creek flows quietly. The Battle of Antietam, on September 17, 1862, is one of the bloodiest days in American history. Union forces, led by General George McClellan, clash with Confederate troops under General Robert E. Lee, a brilliant commander torn by loyalty to his Virginia homeland. Over 22,000 soldiers are killed, wounded, or missing in a single day.
their blood staining the creek and fields. Though neither side wins decisively, the Union's tactical victory halts Lee's advance into the North. More importantly, it gives Lincoln the opportunity to announce a bold decision, one that will alter the war's course. In 1863, picture a small Pennsylvania town called Gettysburg. From July 1st to 3rd, Union forces, commanded by General George Meade, battle Lee's army in a pivotal fight. The fields and hills of Gettysburg become a battleground, with ferocious assaults like Pickett's Charge, where thousands of Confederate soldiers fall under Union fire. When the smoke clears, over 50,000 men from both sides are dead or wounded. At the Gettysburg Cemetery in November 1863, Lincoln delivers the Gettysburg Address. With a steady voice, he declares, "We are met on a great battlefield, to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that that nation might live." Brief, at just 272 words, the speech is a torch illuminating the war's purpose, preserving a nation conceived in liberty, and ensuring that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. In 1863, the cliffs along the Mississippi River at Vicksburg, Mississippi. Union forces, led by General Ulysses S. Grant, besieged the city for 6 weeks, cutting off Confederate supplies. Grant, with resolute eyes and unassuming demeanor, guides his men through forests and swamps. On July 4, 1863, Vicksburg surrenders, giving the Union control of the Mississippi River and splitting the Confederacy in two.
The Emancipation Proclamation, a flame of freedom. On September 22, 1862, in the White House, Abraham Lincoln sits at his desk, pen in hand. After Antietam, he issues the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that as of January 1, 1863, all enslaved people in Confederate-held territories will be free. It does not end slavery entirely. It applies only to areas Lincoln cannot enforce, but it is a turning point. In a small Boston church, Frederick Douglass, a former enslaved man and eloquent orator, reads the proclamation aloud. The crowd cheers, their eyes shining with hope. For millions of enslaved people, the proclamation is a flame in the night, promising that freedom is near. It also shifts the war's purpose, not just to preserve the Union, but to end slavery. Thousands of Black Americans join the Union Army, fighting bravely in regiments like the 54th Massachusetts. But the proclamation brings challenges. In the North, some worry the war now focuses too heavily on slavery, while in the South, it strengthens resolve to fight. Lincoln, with a heavy heart, knows the road ahead is long, but believes freedom is the highest cause. Appomattox, the dawn of peace. By 1865, the war nears its end. Ulysses S. Grant, now commander of all Union forces, pursues Robert E. Lee's army through Virginia. After victories at Petersburg and Richmond, the Confederate capital, Lee is cornered. On April 9, 1865, at a small house in Appomattox Courthouse, Lee, in crisp uniform, meets Grant in mud-stained clothes. In a quiet room, Lee signs the surrender, ending the war. Grant, with generosity, allows Confederate soldiers to keep their horses and return home, saying, "Let them go back and plant a crop for the spring." Though minor skirmishes continue for weeks, Appomattox marks the Civil War's end. Over 600,000 lives are lost, and millions bear physical and emotional scars. But the Union's victory yields two monumental outcomes. The Union is restored, and slavery is abolished with the 13th Amendment, passed in December 1865, declaring that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States. Healing and a dream continued. In the spring of 1865, Americans begin to heal. But joy is fleeting.
On April 14, 1865, Lincoln is assassinated at Ford's Theater, plunging the nation into grief. Yet Lincoln's legacy, a united Union and freedom for all, endures. From the fields of Gettysburg to the rivers of Vicksburg, people start rebuilding. Freed enslaved people, like stars emerging from darkness, search for family, learn to read, and build communities. Soldiers return home, carrying stories of courage and sacrifice. The American Civil War is a tale of sorrow and triumph, of a nation that found light through the storm.
New winds over old fields. From 1865 to 1900, this is a time of rebirth and challenge. In the South, Reconstruction seeks to heal war's wounds and bring equality to freed Black Americans, but faces fierce resistance. In the North and West, the Gilded Age brings massive factories, steamships, and dazzling cities, but also inequality and corruption. Through it all, a wave of reform, known as the Progressive Movement, rises, carrying hope for a fairer society. Reconstruction, Seeds of Justice. In 1865, a small Georgia village where freed enslaved people gather under a sprawling oak. The Civil War has ended, and the 13th Amendment has abolished slavery, granting freedom to millions of Black Americans. With eyes gleaming with hope, they dream of a new life, owning land, learning to read, and voting as citizens. Reconstruction, spanning 1865 to 1877, is the federal government's effort to integrate them into American society and rebuild the war-torn South. In a newly built school, Frederick Douglass, with a warm voice and steadfast gaze, tells young Black students, knowledge is the key to freedom. The Freedmen's Bureau, a federal agency, is established to aid freed enslaved people, providing food, schools, and legal support. The 14th Amendment, passed in 1868, guarantees citizenship and equal protection under the law, while the 15th Amendment, passed in 1870, bans voting discrimination based on race. For the first time, Black Americans are elected to state and national legislatures, like Hiram Revels, the first Black senator from Mississippi.
But the path is not easy. Many white Southerners oppose Reconstruction, fearing loss of power and privilege. Jim Crow laws emerge, enforcing racial segregation in schools, transportation, and public spaces. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, use violence to intimidate Black Americans and Reconstruction supporters, burning homes and attacking at night. Yet many Black Americans persevere, building churches, schools, and communities, sowing seeds of justice for future generations. By 1877, Reconstruction ends when federal troops withdraw from the South after a political compromise. Jim Crow laws spread, and Black voting rights are curtailed by tactics like poll taxes and literacy tests. Though Reconstruction falls short of its goals, it lays a foundation for the future struggle for equality. The Gilded Age, Light and Shadow. In the 1870s and 80s, a bustling city like Chicago, where skyscrapers rise and factory smoke drifts across the sky. This is the Gilded Age, a name that reflects both dazzling wealth and hidden injustice. Industrialization booms, bringing inventions like Alexander Graham Bell's telephone and Thomas Edison's light bulb. Railroads stretch across the nation, linking cities to Kansas wheat fields and California gold mines. On a New York street, hear the whistle of steamships and voices of immigrants from Ireland, Italy, and Eastern Europe. Millions flock to America, seeking opportunity in factories, coal mines, and construction sites. They work in harsh conditions, with long hours and low wages. Meanwhile, robber barons like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie build oil and steel empires, amassing vast fortunes. Corruption seeps into politics.
Political machines like Tammany Hall in New York rig elections, trading jobs and money for votes. Yet, the Gilded Age also sparks innovation. Universities expand, and women like Frances Willard fight for voting rights and temperance, believing these changes will create a better society. In the West, pioneers push the frontier, but this leads to conflict with native peoples. Tribes like the Sioux and Cheyenne are forced onto reservations, and battles like the Battle of Little Bighorn, 1876, show their courageous resistance.
The progressive movement, winds of reform. By the 1890s, a wave of reform, known as the progressive movement, sweeps across the United States. Reformers, from journalists to activists, believe they can address the Gilded Age's problems: inequality, corruption, and injustice. Inspired by the idea of a fairer society, they work tirelessly to make that dream real. In a Chicago settlement house, Jane Addams, with a gentle smile and resolute heart, opens Hull House to aid immigrants. Hull House offers classes, childcare, and job support, bringing hope to struggling families. Addams believes everyone, regardless of background, deserves a chance. Journalists, called muckrakers, use their pens to expose injustice. Ida Tarbell writes about Standard Oil's monopolistic practices, while Upton Sinclair reveals horrific conditions in meatpacking plants in The Jungle. Their stories spur Congress to pass laws like the Pure Food and Drug Act, 1906, protecting consumers. Workers rise up. Unions like the American Federation of Labor organize strikes for higher wages and safer conditions. Though strikes are often suppressed, they lay the groundwork for future labor reforms. Women, led by figures like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, fight for voting rights. They march, write, and speak to crowds, believing women must have a voice in government. In a Seneca Falls hall, Anthony declares, "Failure is impossible." Though women's suffrage waits until 1920, the progressive movement plants seeds for change. A nation looking forward. By 1900, the United States steps into a new century. From Reconstruction schools in the South to Gilded Age factories in the North, from Western reservations to Chicago settlement houses, the nation has transformed profoundly. Freed enslaved people build communities despite Jim Crow laws. Immigrants turn cities into cultural hubs despite poverty. And progressive reformers ignite hope for a just society. Though injustices persist, racism, economic inequality, and women's limited rights, the American spirit shines through. They believe that, like rivers flowing through the land, the path to justice may be long, but the destination is worth the effort. The Spanish-American War, a superpower's first steps. In 1898, a bustling New York harbor where warships gleam under the sun. The United States, now a robust industrial nation, looks outward with new ambition. In Cuba and the Philippines, Spanish colonies, people struggle against oppression, catching American attention. When the USS Maine mysteriously explodes in Havana's harbor, killing 266 sailors, U.S. newspapers clamor for war with sensational headlines, "Remember the Maine!" On a Washington, D.C. street, hear the passionate voice of Theodore Roosevelt, then Assistant Secretary of the Navy. With a radiant smile and sparkling eyes, Roosevelt believes war will prove America's strength. In April 1898, Congress declares war on Spain, launching the Spanish-American War. The conflict is short but fierce. In Cuba, Roosevelt leads the Rough Riders in the Battle of San Juan Hill, charging through smoke and gunfire. In the Philippines, Admiral George Dewey defeats the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay in mere hours.
Within 4 months, Spain surrenders, and the 1898 Treaty of Paris grants Cuba independence under U.S. influence and cedes Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. The Spanish-American War marks the United States' rise as a global power, with territory stretching from the Caribbean to the Pacific. World War I, a distant flame. In 1914, Europe plunges into World War I. In the United States, people wish to stay on the sidelines. President Woodrow Wilson, with a calm voice and stern gaze, calls for neutrality, believing America can mediate peace. But when German submarines sink the Lusitania in 1915, killing 128 Americans, and continue attacking merchant ships, public opinion shifts. By 1917, Germany's Zimmermann telegram, proposing an alliance with Mexico against the U.S., leaves Wilson no choice. In April 1917, the United States declares war on Germany, joining the Allies. Chicago train station, where young soldiers in uniform bid farewell to families before boarding ships to Europe.
In battles like Belleau Wood and Meuse-Argonne, they fight bravely through mud and gunfire, helping repel German forces. The guns fall silent on November 11, 1918. The 1919 Treaty of Versailles ends the war, and Wilson proposes the League of Nations to prevent future conflicts. But at home, Congress rejects joining, wary of losing sovereignty. World War I affirms the United States as a global power, but shows it is not yet ready to lead the world. The 1920s, jazz melodies and shadows. The 1920s, dubbed the Roaring Twenties, pulse with energy and creativity. After the war, the economy booms, bringing cars, radios, and movie theaters. On a Harlem, New York street, hear the saxophone wail from a jazz club, where Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington captivate audiences. Jazz, with its vibrant rhythms and free spirit, becomes the voice of a new generation. Women, having won voting rights with the 19th Amendment in 1920, embrace a bold era with short skirts and flapper style. But the 1920s cast shadows. The 1920 Prohibition Act, banning the production and sale of alcohol, fuels smuggling and gangs like Al Capone's. Racism remains a deep scar. The Ku Klux Klan resurges, spreading beyond the South to the North, targeting Black Americans, immigrants, and Catholics. In 1921, the Tulsa Massacre devastates Greenwood, a thriving Black community known as Black Wall Street. Yet, figures like W.E.B. Du Bois and the Harlem Renaissance bring hope, celebrating Black culture through literature, art, and music. The Great Depression, an economic storm. On October 29, 1929, the New York stock market crashes, ushering in the Great Depression. Banks fail, factories close, and millions lose jobs. By 1933, nearly 25% of Americans are unemployed, and Hoovervilles, shantytowns, sprout nationwide. In Oklahoma's parched fields, Dust Bowl storms sweep away soil, forcing thousands of families to migrate to California. They travel dusty roads, clinging to faint hope. But in the darkness, a light emerges. In 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt, with a warm smile and a voice that soothes via radio, is elected president. He promises a New Deal for relief, recovery, and reform. The New Deal launches programs like the Works Progress Administration, WPA, building roads, schools, and parks, employing millions. The 1935 Social Security Act provides pensions and unemployment aid, offering workers security. Though the New Deal does not fully end the Depression, it restores hope and reshapes government's role in supporting people. A small Ohio home lit by electricity for the first time thanks to the New Deal.
These reforms, like seeds in the soil, will grow in future generations. A superpower with a resilient heart. By 1939, the United States stands on the cusp of a new century. From victories in Cuba to trenches in France, from jazz dance floors to Depression breadlines, the nation has matured into a superpower. But it carries scars, racism, inequality, and economic challenges. Yet the American spirit shines through, with artists like Louis Armstrong, leaders like Franklin Roosevelt, and ordinary people who believe tomorrow will be brighter.
Winds through the global storm. Through the years of the Great Depression, the United States found strength to overcome hardship, building new roads and sturdy bridges. But now, in 1941, a greater storm looms from afar, drawing the world into the vortex of war. From the harbors of Hawaii to the beaches of Normandy, from Pacific Islands to the ravaged cities of Japan, the United States will enter a conflict that shapes its destiny and the world's. World War II, when Americans, from young soldiers to factory workers, from families awaiting letters to leaders bearing great responsibility, unite to face an unprecedented challenge. Pearl Harbor, a day of infamy. On December 7, 1941, tranquil morning at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Waves shimmer under the sun, and U.S. Navy ships rest quietly. Sailors eat breakfast, chat, and enjoy a sundae. But in the sky, a strange hum grows, the roar of aircraft engines. Hundreds of Japanese planes, carrying bombs and torpedoes, strike without warning. In 2 hours, the sky blazes, black smoke rises, and over 2,400 Americans perish, with dozens of ships and planes destroyed. Soldiers rush to guns, nurses tend the wounded, and sailors fight to save ships. The Pearl Harbor attack, called "A Date Which Will Live in Infamy" by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, changes the United States forever. The next day, Roosevelt, with a calm but resolute voice, addresses Congress, calling for war against Japan. Soon after, Germany and Italy declare war on the U.S., thrusting America into World War II on 2 fronts, Europe and the Pacific. Americans spring into action. Young men line up to enlist, women take factory jobs, and families plant victory gardens to conserve food. 2 fronts, Europe and the Pacific. By 1942, the United States fights across 2 oceans. In Europe, Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, controls much of the continent.
While in the Pacific, Japan expands its empire across islands in Southeast Asia. The U.S., alongside the Allies, Britain, the Soviet Union, and others, faces a monumental task, defeating 2 formidable enemies on battlefields thousands of miles apart. The Pacific Front, island hopping, and Midway. After Pearl Harbor, Japan seizes islands from Wake to the Philippines. To counter them, the U.S. adopts an island-hopping strategy, capturing key islands to approach Japan. A pivotal victory comes in June 1942 at the Battle of Midway. Thanks to decoded Japanese messages, the U.S. Navy, led by Admiral Chester Nimitz, ambushes and destroys 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, shifting the Pacific War's tide. Subsequent battles, like Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima, are grueling. Young American soldiers, often far from home, fight through mud and heat, carrying hopes of peace. At Iwo Jima in 1945, the image of 6 Marines raising the U.S. flag atop Mount Suribachi becomes an enduring symbol of courage. The European Front, D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge. In Europe, Nazi Germany holds sway from France to Poland. The U.S., under General Dwight D. Eisenhower, prepares a massive assault to liberate the continent. On June 6, 1944, known as D-Day,
Over 156,000 Allied troops land on Normandy's beaches in France. Soldiers laden with heavy packs wade through cold waves under German fire. Though thousands fall, they secure the beaches, paving the way for France's liberation. In the winter of 1944, Germany launches a desperate counterattack at the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium. In freezing cold, American troops fight through snow and fog, holding the line. The victory at the Bulge weakens Germany, setting the stage for the final push to Berlin.
The atomic bomb, an end and a great question. By summer 1945, the war nears its end. In Europe, Germany surrenders on May 7, 1945, after Hitler's suicide and the Allies' capture of Berlin. But in the Pacific, Japan fights on fiercely despite heavy losses. President Harry S. Truman, succeeding Roosevelt after his death in April 1945, faces a wrenching decision. American scientists, through the Manhattan Project, have developed the atomic bomb, a weapon of unprecedented power. In a New Mexico desert, the first atomic test, Trinity, lights the night sky in July 1945. Truman, with a heavy heart, decides to use the bomb to force Japan's surrender, avoiding a costly invasion. On August 6, 1945, the bomb, Little Boy, devastates Hiroshima, killing about 80,000 people instantly. 3 days later, Fat Man strikes Nagasaki, claiming tens of thousands more lives. On August 14, 1945, Japan surrenders, ending World War II. In New York's Times Square, crowds cheer and embrace on VJ, Victory Over Japan Day. A new superpower and the shadow of the Cold War. By late 1945, the United States emerges as a superpower. With a robust economy, powerful military, and atomic weapons, it leads the free world. In a Pittsburgh factory, workers shift from making tanks to cars, fueling prosperity. Returning soldiers, aided by the GI Bill, attend college and buy homes, building a new middle class. But peace brings new tensions. The Soviet Union, a wartime ally, becomes a rival as both nations vie for global influence. The Cold War begins, marked by suspicion and an arms race. The U.S. leads the creation of the United Nations in 1945, hoping to prevent future conflicts, but the road ahead is fraught.
Winds between two worlds. After World War II, the United States rose as a superpower, with cities aglow with lights and roads leading to the future. But on the horizon, a new shadow emerges. Not a hot war of guns and bullets, but a cold, decades-long confrontation between two ideologies. From Iowa's fields to Cuba's beaches, from Vietnam's jungles to distant stars, this is the story of the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union stood on opposite banks of a tense river, eyeing each other across the waters. This is from 1947 to 1991, when the world split into two camps, the United States with dreams of freedom and democracy, and the Soviet Union with communist ideals. Containment policy. The Iron Curtain falls. In 1947, small Missouri town where President Harry S. Truman addresses Congress, his voice calm but resolute. World War II has ended, but peace is fragile. The Soviet Union, once an ally, now controls Eastern Europe, erecting an iron curtain across the continent, as Winston Churchill describes. Truman, with a stern gaze, announces the Truman Doctrine, pledging support to nations resisting communism. This marks the start of the containment policy, a strategy to curb Soviet expansion without direct war. In Greece, the U.S. sends aid to thwart communist rebels. The Marshall Plan, launched the same year, pours billions into Western Europe, rebuilding war-torn cities and bolstering democracies.
In Berlin, when the Soviets blockaded the city in 1948, the US and Britain launched the Berlin Airlift, dropping food and fuel from the skies. But at home, fear of communism spreads. McCarthyism, named after Senator Joseph McCarthy, fuels the Second Red Scare. McCarthy accuses hundreds, from government officials to Hollywood stars, of being communists, often without evidence. Though McCarthy loses credibility by 1954, the fear leaves scars, a reminder that even in a free nation, anxiety can blur justice.
The Cuban Missile Crisis, brink of catastrophe. In October 1962, in a White House meeting room, President John F. Kennedy, with a pensive gaze, examines reconnaissance photos. The images reveal Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida, capable of destroying U.S. cities in minutes. Kennedy, with a steady voice on television, informs the nation of the crisis, demanding the Soviets remove the missiles and imposing a naval blockade around Cuba. For 13 days, the world teeters on the edge of disaster. Soviet ships near the blockade, and the world holds its breath. But through secret negotiations, Kennedy and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev reach a deal. The Soviets withdraw the missiles from Cuba, and the U.S. pledges not to invade the island, later secretly removing missiles from Turkey. Americans exhale, but the Cuban Missile Crisis is a stark warning of peace's fragility in the nuclear age. It spurs steps toward détente, like a hotline between Washington and Moscow for direct communication. The Korean and Vietnam Wars, containment on the battlefield. In 1950, the Korean Peninsula becomes a hot front in the Cold War. After World War II, Korea splits, the Communist North, backed by the Soviet Union and China, and the Democratic South, supported by the U.S. In June 1950, the North invades the South, and the U.S., under United Nations command, sends troops to contain communism. Korean hillside, where artillery echoes through valleys. General Douglas MacArthur leads U.S. forces to repel the North, but China's entry turns the conflict brutal.
The Korean War drags on until 1953, ending in an armistice that divides Korea at the 38th parallel. Over 36,000 American soldiers die, and the war reinforces U.S. resolve to contain communism, though at a steep cost. In the 1950s and 1960s, Vietnam's dense jungles. To halt communism's spread in Southeast Asia, the U.S. backs South Vietnam against the Soviet and Chinese-supported North. In 1964, after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Congress passes the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, allowing President Lyndon B. Johnson to escalate the war. The Vietnam War becomes a protracted conflict, claiming over 58,000 American lives and causing immense suffering for millions of Vietnamese. At home, it divides the nation, sparking widespread anti-war protests. By 1973, the U.S. withdraws under the Paris Peace Accords, and in 1975, South Vietnam falls. The war leaves scars, but teaches America the limits of military power. The space race, reaching for the stars. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launches Sputnik, a small metal sphere beeping from space. In America, the news strikes like lightning. The space race begins, not with weapons, but with science and dreams. President Dwight D. Eisenhower establishes NASA, and the U.S. launches Explorer 1 in 1958. In 1961, Kennedy vows to land a man on the moon before the decade's end. On July 20, 1969, the dream comes true. Astronaut Neil Armstrong steps onto the lunar surface, saying, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Apollo 11 is not just a scientific triumph, but a symbol of American spirit, daring to dream big and transcend limits. The Soviet collapse, a new dawn.
By the 1980s, the Cold War nears its end. President Ronald Reagan, branding the Soviet Union an evil empire, invests heavily in defense, including the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, with policies of reform and openness, tries to modernize his nation, but its economy falters. In 1989, the Berlin Wall falls, a symbol of East-West division. By 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves, and the Cold War ends.
Winds of justice. Nearly a century has passed since the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, yet the shadow of injustice still lingers over many communities. In the South, Jim Crow laws segregate Black and white Americans, from schools to buses, from restaurants to dreams. But in the 1950s, a new wind begins to blow, a wind of courage, unity, and the belief that everyone deserves equal treatment. This is the civil rights movement, when ordinary people, students, seamstresses, preachers, and housewives rise to demand justice. They carry no guns, but their hearts are steadfast, and they believe in the power of love and peace. From courtrooms to bustling streets, from Montgomery to Washington, D.C., they write a new chapter in American history where the dream of equality draws closer than ever. From 1950 to 1968, African Americans and their allies fight to dismantle injustice through court rulings, nonviolent protests, and laws that transform the nation. Brown v. Board of Education, a transformative ruling. In 1954, Washington, D.C. courtroom, where Supreme Court justices hear a case called Brown v. Board of Education. In Topeka, Kansas, a young girl named Linda Brown, with a shy smile and bright eyes, walks miles to a Black-only school, though a white school sits near her home. Her father, Oliver Brown, and other families sue the school board, arguing that segregated schools are unjust and unconstitutional. Thurgood Marshall, a brilliant NAAP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, lawyer, stands before the court, arguing that separate but equal is a lie. Black schools often lack books, desks, and teachers, while white schools are well-funded. With a warm, steady voice, Marshall says segregation harms not only children, but the heart of a nation. On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court unanimously rules that racial segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. The Brown v. Board of Education decision is a ray of light, like sunlight piercing clouds. From Topeka to Atlanta, African Americans celebrate, embracing under the sun, believing their children will one day learn alongside all others. But in the South, many white communities resist, closing schools or opening private academies to maintain segregation. Brown is a first step, but the road ahead remains long and rocky. The Montgomery bus boycott, a courageous step. On December 1, 1955, busy street in Montgomery, Alabama. Rosa Parks, a seamstress with gentle yet resolute eyes, boards a bus after a long workday. Under Jim Crow laws, Black passengers must sit at the back, and if a white passenger needs a seat, they must stand. When the driver demands Rosa give up her seat for a white passenger, she quietly refuses. "I was tired of giving in," she later says, not just about that day, but a lifetime of injustice. News of her defiance spreads like a breeze through Montgomery's streets. The Black community, led by a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr., launches a boycott of the city's buses. King, with a warm voice and faith in Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolent philosophy, calls for action. "We will not use violence," he says, "but we will use love and dignity to demand justice." From December 5, 1955, tens of thousands of Black Montgomeryans refuse to ride buses. They walk miles in the heat, share rides, and support each other. The boycott lasts over a year, despite threats, a bomb thrown at King's home, and arrests. Finally, in November 1956, the Supreme Court rules bus segregation unconstitutional. On December 21, King and Rosa board a bus, sitting in the front rows, under the world's gaze. The Montgomery bus boycott not only changes laws, but ignites the civil rights movement. It shows that ordinary people, united, can achieve the extraordinary. Nonviolent protests, a spreading flame. In the early 1960s, the civil rights movement sweeps across the South. Inspired by Montgomery, students, workers, and preachers organize nonviolent protests, from sit-ins to freedom rides to challenge segregation. In Greensboro, North Carolina, in 1960, 4 black students sit at a whites-only lunch counter in a Woolworth store, refusing to leave despite taunts and threats. Their action inspires thousands in Nashville, Atlanta, and beyond to sit at counters, libraries, and bus stations. In 1961, Freedom Riders board interstate buses to test segregation at Southern terminals. They face violence, from rock-throwing mobs to firebombs, but refuse to retreat. In Anniston, Alabama, a bus is burned, yet the riders press on, carrying a message of equality nationwide. In 1963, the Birmingham campaign elevates the movement. Birmingham, Alabama, known as America's most segregated city, is where King and civil rights leaders organize protests and boycotts. Children and youth march in the streets, facing fire hoses and police dogs. These images, broadcast worldwide, shake the nation's conscience, forcing many to confront the brutality of racism. The Birmingham campaign leads to an agreement ending segregation in the city's public facilities. More importantly, it showcases the power of persistence and nonviolence. March on Washington and I Have a Dream. On August 28, 1963, Washington, D.C. hosts over 250,000 people, black, white, young, old, for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Under summer sun, they gather before the Lincoln Memorial, united in a dream of a just America. This is a moment of solidarity as people from every corner of the nation join hands, sing, and pray. Martin Luther King Jr., in a simple suit and with a resonant voice, steps to the podium to deliver his I Have a Dream speech. I have a dream, he says, that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal. He envisions a day when black and white children join hands, when justice flows like a river and freedom rings like a bell. King's words, like a song, touch every heart. The speech is not just a call for change, but a promise that the dream can come true. The March on Washington becomes a symbol of the civil rights movement, inspiring the world with the power of hope and unity.
The Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. By 1964, the civil rights movement's efforts begin to bear fruit. The March on Washington and Birmingham campaign pressure Congress, and President Lyndon B. Johnson, succeeding John F. Kennedy, resolves to act. On July 2, 1964, Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act, banning racial discrimination in employment, public places, and federally funded facilities. But the fight continues. In many southern states, black Americans are still blocked from voting by literacy tests, poll taxes, and violence. In 1965, civil rights activists organize a march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, to demand voting rights. On March 7, known as Bloody Sunday, police attack marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, beating them with clubs and tear gas. The images of Bloody Sunday shock the nation, spurring Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act on August 6, 1965. This law eliminates voting barriers, ensuring black Americans can vote freely. The Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts dismantled Jim Crow laws, ushering in a new era of equality. An unfinished dream.
By 1968, the civil rights movement achieves great victories but faces profound loss. On April 4, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, leaving a nation in grief. Yet his legacy endures. In desegregated streets, schools open to all, and the hearts of those who continue the fight for justice.
Winds of a new era. After years of fighting for civil rights, the United States stepped into the 1970s with a heart brimming with hope, yet marked by scars. From the neon-lit streets of New York to the golden wheat fields of Kansas, Americans sought meaning in a world in flux. Rock music blasted from radios, flared jeans danced in the wind, and dreams of a brighter future wove through new challenges. The anti-war movement and Kent State, the voice of youth. In 1970, a college campus in Ohio shaded by ancient oaks and alive with students' laughter. The Vietnam War, stretching over a decade, had split America in two. Thousands of miles away, young soldiers battled in tropical jungles, while back home, many, especially the youth, questioned the war's purpose. They rallied in protests, wielding signs that read, "Peace Now," and singing the songs of Bob Dylan and Joan Baez. On May 4, 1970, after President Richard Nixon announced the war's expansion into Cambodia, hundreds of students gathered to protest. The air crackled with tension, yet they held faith in the power of peaceful voices. Then, abruptly, the Ohio National Guard, summoned to quell the crowd, opened fire. In 13 terrifying seconds, 4 students fell dead, and 9 were wounded. The Kent State tragedy etched a scar into America's soul, igniting protests nationwide and leaving many to wonder, how can a fractured nation mend? The anti-war movement pressed on. From Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, millions marched, penned letters to Congress, and rejected the draft. They didn't merely oppose the war, they dreamed of a world where peace and justice prevailed. Though the Vietnam War lingered until 1975, the movement reshaped how Americans saw their government and their duty to speak out. Watergate, when trust faltered. In 1972, an office building in Washington, D.C. called Watergate. Beneath a faint moon, a group slipped into the Democratic Party headquarters, planting wiretaps to gather intelligence for Nixon's re-election bid. When uncovered, it unraveled one of the greatest political scandals in U.S. history. Watergate was more than a break-in. It laid bare a tangled web of espionage, power abuses, and White House cover-ups. Congress launched televised hearings, gripping millions as lawmakers grilled witnesses, and Nixon, with weary eyes, defended himself. As evidence piled up, including tapes of Nixon discussing the affair, public faith in government crumbled. On August 8, 1974, facing impeachment, Nixon resigned, the first U.S. president to do so. Vice President Gerald Ford stepped in, proclaiming, "Our long national nightmare is over." Watergate left a layered legacy. It eroded trust in leaders, but showed democracy could right itself. From then on, Americans demanded greater openness from those in power. Postmodernism and social movements, new voices. By the late 1970s, the United States embraced an age of diversity and free expression.
Postmodernism swept the nation, shattering traditional boundaries in art, music, and literature. Films like Star Wars and Saturday Night Fever lit up popular culture, while disco beats and punk rock throbbed from clubs. Alongside these cultural shifts, social movements blossomed. The second-wave feminist movement fought for gender equality in workplaces, schools, and homes. Activists like Gloria Steinem, with flowing hair and a stirring voice, called women to action. In 1972, Congress passed the Equal Rights Amendment, ERA, though it fell short of full ratification. The environmental movement also took root, sparked by the first Earth Day in 1970. Alarmed by polluted air and water, Americans pushed for laws like the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act. Reagan's policies, a conservative era. In 1980, Ronald Reagan, a former actor with a warm smile and resonant voice, won the presidency. Reagan ushered in a conservative wind, pledging tax cuts, reduced government spending, and a revival of national pride. His economic approach, dubbed Reaganomics, slashed taxes for businesses and the wealthy, betting that prosperity would trickle down. Reagan also championed a staunch anti-communist stance known as the Reagan Doctrine. He supported anti-communist efforts in Latin America and Afghanistan and ramped up defense spending, including the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. While his policies fueled economic growth and helped topple the Soviet Union, they also deepened inequality and national debt. Reagan remains a polarizing figure, cherished by some for his optimism, faulted by others for sidelining social needs. The AIDS crisis and war on drugs, social scars. In the 1980s, a new shadow loomed over the United States, the AIDS crisis. HIV, first noted in 1981, spread swiftly, hitting gay men and drug users hardest. Thousands perished, and stigma left many shunned. Activists like those in ACT UP took to the streets, demanding research and care, compelling government response.
At the same time, the war on drugs under Reagan and successor George H.W. Bush intensified social divides. With the rallying cry, "Just say no," the government escalated arrests and imprisonment for drug offenses, disproportionately striking Black and Latino communities. The war on drugs worsened inequality, leaving neighborhoods scarred and fragmented. Yet glimmers of hope shone through. Community groups launched AIDS support centers, and families banded together against prejudice. The AIDS crisis and war on drugs tested the nation, but underscored the strength of compassion and unity. The Gulf War, military might. In 1991, the United States spearheaded an international coalition in the Gulf War. After Iraq's Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, President George H.W. Bush unleashed Operation Desert Storm. Armed with cutting-edge technology, from Tomahawk missiles to stealth bombers, the U.S. and allies freed Kuwait in weeks. The swift victory cemented America's status as a military titan. Across the nation, people tied yellow ribbons to welcome troops home, basking in triumph. The dot-com boom, a technological dream. By the mid-1990s, a fresh revolution stirred in Silicon Valley. The Internet, once a niche tool for researchers, burst into a global force. Startups like Netscape, Yahoo, and Amazon sprang up, promising a future linked by screens. The dot-com boom sparked a frenzy of wealth, with investors flooding tech ventures. But in 2000, the bubble burst as unprofitable firms crumbled. The brief economic jolt rocked Silicon Valley, yet it paved the way for giants like Google and Apple. Despite the stumble, the dot-com era showcased America's relentless drive toward new frontiers.